Welcome to History in Ashes, where we bring to life the buried echoes of human history. If you're new here, you've just stumbled into a quiet corner of the past where we speak calmly, clearly, and sometimes at length about the slow grind of empires, the forgotten details of daily life, and the forces that shaped our world. Tonight, you're stepping into the long and broken path of the Roman Empire, from ashes to empire, and back again. Before we go too deep, let me ask, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it over there? I always wonder if you're listening in bed, on a cold walk, or maybe while doing dishes like some tired legionary cleaning his kit. Scroll down to the comments. Let me know. And while you're at it, maybe consider subscribing? If Romans had clicked subscribe as easily as they swore oaths to emperors, we might still be under the empire. But unlike Roman conscription, this one's voluntary and less bloody. Now, close your eyes if you like. Let the lights of the modern world fall away. Listen. It is the year 476, not as a date on parchment, but as a lived moment. Rome, the eternal city, sits in silence. The aqueducts still carry water. The streets are still lined with marble and dust. But something is missing. Something has been missing for a long time. The last emperor of the West, a boy named Romulus Augustus, has just been deposed by a barbarian warlord named Odoacer. No battle is fought in the Forum, no gods cry out, no legions rise to defend him. He simply vanishes, taken to a quiet estate in Campania. Just like that, 1,000 years of Roman rule in the West ends not in fire or glory, but in paperwork. And yet, listen closer. A city does not end because someone says it does. Rome still breathes. In the cracked stone of its walls, in the quiet prayers of old women lighting lamps to forgotten gods, in the ink-stained hands of scribes copying Virgil while listening for the tread of foreign boots. But to truly understand this moment, this quiet end, you must walk backward through time. Not just decades, centuries. You must walk back to muddy huts beside the Tiber, to shepherds and thieves, to a city not yet imagined. Because Rome did not begin with emperors. It began with fear, hunger, and a desperate need to belong. But even as it dies in the West, remember Rome is not entirely gone. Not yet. It survives in Byzantium. It survives in roads and words, in our calendars and our laws, in how we build cities and break them. But why does it matter? Why spend time, maybe 12 hours or more, tracing every slow, dusty mile of a dead empire? Because Rome was not just a place. It was an idea, and ideas don't die the way kingdoms do. So tonight, we begin our walk backwards, through ruins and reforms, through whispers and wars, through lives that mattered and lives that never made the books. We begin not with Romulus Augustus, the boy who lost an empire. We begin with Romulus, the boy who built one. But before that, let's linger for one more breath at the fall. Imagine standing on the Palatine Hill in those final years. You look out over the Forum, and you see weeds in the marble cracks. The Senate still meets, but no one listens. Vandals and Visigoths have already come and gone. They looted what gold was left, tore down statues, and melted the gods. The grain shipments from Africa have stopped. The baths are quiet. The water still flows, but not everywhere. Only where it matters to the few still rich, still holding on. You hear Latin, but also German, Greek, Syriac. The empire is no longer Roman in the way it once was. The army is mostly foreign. The taxes are cruel. The people remember what it once was. But they also just want bread and silence. What does it mean, you might wonder, for something so vast, so wide, so deep, so proud to simply stop? And more strangely, how did it ever begin? You see, the story of Rome is not the story of power. It is the story of survival, of adaptation, of winning slowly, and of losing even slower. Centuries before Romulus Augustus, a different Romulus, a feral boy from a violent tale, stood with blood on his hands and founded a city. According to the stories passed down in smoke and scroll, he had killed his twin brother, Remus, in a quarrel over omens and territory. And then, from that blood-soaked patch of land, came a city of thieves, runaways, and the desperate. And somehow, those people survived. They built with stone. They drained swamps. They turned superstition into religion. And they fought endlessly. Sometimes with courage, often with cruelty, always with purpose. From mud brick huts to marble halls, Rome rose not in glory, but in increments, and with every victory came a new challenge. Every expansion sowed a future fracture. That is the nature of empire. It grows, until it forgets why it grew at all. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You are standing now in the ruins of the end, the 5th century, but we will step soon into the chaos of beginnings. Into a world without maps, where the Tiber floods and wolves still howl on the hills. Back when Rome was just an idea in the minds of men who had nothing except an unwillingness to disappear. So, as you listen to this, wherever you are, ask yourself this: can a people truly rise from nothing, simply by believing in their own myth? And if they can, how long before that myth eats them whole? Shall we walk back to the beginning? The land around you is not yet Italy. It has no borders, no name, no emperor, no maps, only hills and forests. Swamps buzz with insects. Small villages cluster beside rivers, sometimes little more than a few huts bound with straw and dung. You can smell the wood smoke clinging to the clothes of people who've never travelled more than a few miles from where they were born. And on the central western coast of this wild peninsula, just inland from the salty breath of the Tyrrhenian Sea, there are 7 hills: the Palatine, the Capitoline, the Aventine, the Caelian, the Esquiline, the Viminal, the Quirinal. These names mean nothing yet, even to those who live upon them. They are simply hills, raised earth, places to see from and hide upon. But this is where it begins. The story we tell ourselves begins not in marble but in mud, not with senators but with shepherds, not with law but with murder. You may have heard the myth already of a woman raped by a god, of twins abandoned in a basket, of a she-wolf suckling them on the riverbank, of Romulus and Remus, of a quarrel over birds and blood. And as much as modern minds try to draw clean lines between fact and story, in this case, the myth matters. Because long after Rome became a power, this tale was its foundation myth, and Rome took its myths very seriously. So picture this: 2 boys, born of royalty but raised in wilderness, growing strong, clever, and wild. They survive by taking what they need, commanding gangs of young men from the hills, and eventually discovering their own birthright. They lead a rebellion. They kill the man who dethroned their grandfather. They restore a king. And then they set out to build a new city. But they cannot agree. Not on the site, not on the gods, and certainly not on who should rule it. Remus mocks his brother, leaps over the shallow beginnings of a wall Romulus has built, and sneers at it. And so, Romulus kills him. It is a familiar beginning in the ancient world, a city founded on blood. Brother against brother, rule over kin, a line drawn in dirt and defended with death. Romulus names the new city after himself, Rome. He declares it open to all outcasts, criminals, wanderers, a city of men with nothing left to lose. And, crucially, very few women. This becomes a problem. For a city to last, it needs children, and for children, it needs women. Romulus turns to the neighbouring tribes, especially the Sabines, and invites them to a grand festival. Games, feasts, celebration. And while the men laugh and drink, Roman men seize the Sabine women and carry them off. The Sabine men rage. War breaks out. But the women, now married, and mothers intervene. They beg both sides to stop, to make peace, to become one people. And so Rome survives again. Not by strength alone, but by adaptation, by absorbing its enemies, by compromise disguised as victory. This is the earliest pattern of Rome. The kings who follow Romulus are mostly legendary Numa Pompilius, who brings religion and calendars, Tullus Hostilius, who makes war a way of life, Ancus Marcius, who builds the first bridge across the Tiber, and then, most significantly, 2 kings named Tarquin. They are Etruscan, foreign, rich, skilled builders. They give Rome its first true walls, its sewer system, its temples, its forum. But they also bring something else: arrogance, cruelty, the sense that power does not have to answer to the people, The last of them, Tarquin the Proud, is not a man of the people. He rules harshly, ignores the Senate, and when his son, Sextus Tarquinius, rapes a noblewoman named Lucretia, and she takes her own life in grief and shame, the Roman people erupt. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, they overthrow the king, and they swear never again to be ruled by one man. This is a turning point not just for Rome, but for the entire story of Western government. Because instead of installing another king, the Romans create something new, or at least new for them, a republic, 2 consuls, elected annually, to prevent tyranny, a senate of elders to guide them, assemblies of citizens to vote if they were male, wealthy, and free, not equality, not democracy as we know it, but something far ahead of its time. Still, survival remains a daily struggle. The early republic is fragile, surrounded by enemies, the Latin League, the Etruscans, the Volsci and the Aequi, mountain tribes, rival cities, raiders, every year new wars, every year new treaties. And slowly, painfully, Rome learns how to endure. Its army evolves. Citizen soldiers are trained, organized by wealth and property. The poorest carry slings or spears. The richest ride horses. Each man must bring his own armor. Campaigns last for a season, then home for the harvest. Victory brings land, land brings wealth, wealth brings division. By the 4th century before Christ, Rome is a small power, not an empire, not yet. But already, the pattern is forming. Conquer, absorb, adapt. And yet for all its survival, the city is not invincible. In the year 390 before Christ, Rome experiences something that will haunt it for centuries. The Gauls come. Led by a chieftain named Brennus, they sweep down from the north, fast, brutal, and unfamiliar. The Romans meet them in battle near the Allia River. They are routed, scattered, crushed. Rome is sacked. The invaders march through the streets. They loot, burn, kill. The Senate hides. The people flee. Sacred geese in the Capitoline temple honk and save what little remains, if the story is to be believed. Eventually, the Gauls are bribed to leave. Rome is left smouldering, broken, humiliated, but it does not fall. Instead, it rebuilds. Stronger, wiser, hardened, and above all, it remembers. For centuries, Roman mothers will warn their children with a single word. The Gauls, the Republic survives this crucible. But it has changed. And with it, a new question arises, one that the Romans themselves would begin to ask. If a city can survive invasion, betrayal, and internal collapse, what, then, can truly destroy it? You are standing in the dirt outside a wooden gate. It is the 4th century before Christ, and Rome is still little more than a city of brick and wood, perched between survival and ambition. Chickens scratch the ground near your feet. A farmer argues over the price of grain with a merchant from the east. Latin fills the air, not yet classical, but rough and local, full of borrowed words from Etruscan and Greek. And outside the gates, the world waits. Rome has survived the sack by the Gauls. But the wound is still fresh. The temples have been rebuilt, the walls repaired, and the old houses replaced this time with stronger defences. You can feel something new taking shape in the city. It is not yet an empire, but it is no longer simply a town. It is something in between, cautious, watchful, and quietly aggressive. To survive this uncertain future, the Romans will need more than stones and soldiers. They will need a system, and so they begin to build one. The early republic is nothing if not practical. Religion is intertwined with politics. Laws are scratched into bronze tablets and displayed in the forum, the 12 tables, a list of rights, duties, and punishments. It is far from fair, and it is not meant to be. It is meant to control. The ruling class, the patricians, hold most of the power. But the plebeians, farmers, tradesmen, foot soldiers begin to demand more. What follows are generations of slow political struggle, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. Over time, the plebeians gain tribunes, officials who can veto unjust laws. They gain the right to hold office, to marry into patrician families, to shape the state, not because the patricians are generous, but because Rome needs its people, and its people need victories. The city grows hungry again. It casts its eyes south, to the rich plains of Campania. And there, It meets resistance from the Samnites' mountain warriors, fierce and mobile, who fight on rocky terrain the Romans are not prepared for. The Samnite Wars, 3 brutal conflicts, stretch across decades. Rome learns hard lessons. In one battle, the Caudine Forks, an entire Roman army is trapped in a mountain pass and forced to surrender. The soldiers are made to pass beneath a yoke, a symbolic gesture of humiliation. It is a shame Rome never forgets. But once again, it does not fall. Rome adapts, builds better roads, constructs alliances instead of outright annexations, offers partial citizenship to conquered peoples, a strategy that makes rebellion less appealing. In return, these allies provide troops. And so the Roman army becomes something new, a vast patchwork of soldiers from across the peninsula, unified not by loyalty to Rome, but by the hope of becoming Roman. By the middle of the 3rd century before Christ, Rome dominates most of central and southern Italy. Its citizens are hardened by war, bound by law, and driven by the quiet conviction that they are destined to rule. But destiny has neighbours, and one of them is across the sea, Carthage. A wealthy city of traders, Carthage lies on the coast of North Africa. Its navy controls much of the western Mediterranean. Its harbours are filled with goods from Spain, Sicily, and beyond. It is rich, experienced, and confident. And in Sicily, the 2 powers collide. It begins, as many wars do, with a small spark, a mercenary force seeking help, an opportunity for influence, and a refusal to back down. What follows is the First Punic War, a brutal naval conflict between a land power learning to sail and a sea power unprepared for a long land war. Rome, with almost no experience, builds a navy from scratch. It copies a Carthaginian ship found wrecked on the shore. Then it adds something new, the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike, allowing Roman infantry to turn sea battles into something they understand, hand-to-hand combat. Victory comes slowly, and at great cost. Thousands drown in storms. Fleets are lost. But Carthage is pushed out of Sicily. The island becomes Rome's first overseas province. And the war ends, not with a crushing blow, but with exhaustion and terms. It will not be the last. As you walk the streets of Rome now, something has changed. The city no longer looks inward. It sees across the sea. Sicily has brought Rome into new waters, and with it, new problems. Managing an empire is not the same as conquering it. Taxation, governance, revolts, pirates, these are not battles won with spears. And while Rome learns how to rule, Carthage recovers. One man will ensure that, Hamilcar Barca, veteran of the First Punic War, proud, bitter, a general who fights in Spain to rebuild Carthaginian power. He brings his son with him, a boy who grows up around soldiers, horses, and hatred. The boy's name is Hannibal, but that story lies just ahead. For now, ask yourself this. When a republic begins to conquer, how long before it stops being a republic? The Tiber flows quietly. Rome sits high above it, now heavier with ambition. By the early 2nd century before Christ, the city has taken its first real step outside the Italian peninsula. It owns Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, all taken from Carthage and held not as allies, but as possessions. It has begun to call itself a power, even if it doesn't yet know what kind. But to the southwest, across the sea, in the sun-scorched lands of Hispania and North Africa, something is stirring, not a nation, but a name. Hannibal, let me place you there. You are standing on a rocky ridge in southern Spain. Below, soldiers drill in dusty silence. The boy is not yet grown, but already he watches the world with that distant stillness that commanders often wear. His father, Hamilcar Barca, tells him of Rome, not just as an enemy, but as an insult, a hunger that will never be satisfied, a shadow that must be broken. Hannibal swears, as a boy, never to befriend the Romans, never to forget what they took, and he does not. Rome, meanwhile, is doing what it always does after a war, recovering, reorganizing, and watching. Carthage is rebuilding, yes, but far away in Spain, among silver mines and new garrisons, Rome assumes, wrongly, that distance will keep them safe. Then comes Saguntum. It is a small town in eastern Spain, allied to Rome, Though deep in what Carthage sees as its territory, Hannibal besieges it. Rome sends envoys. Hannibal ignores them. The town falls. Rome demands justice. Carthage replies, "Do what you must." And so begins the Second Punic War. Rome expects a naval fight. It prepares for a battle at sea, or perhaps in Sicily again. What it does not expect is what comes next. Hannibal marches from Spain across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and then impossibly over the Alps with elephants. Let me be clear, this is not glorious. It is hellish. Snow, starvation, tribal attacks, sheer cliffs, men falling to their deaths. The elephants die, almost all of them, but Hannibal survives. And what comes out of the Alps is not an army of thousands. It is a lean, hardened force, and it begins to dismantle Rome's military confidence piece by piece. At the river Trebia, he draws the Romans into icy waters and destroys them. At Lake Trasimene, he hides in the mist and ambushes them, killing thousands. The Roman response is panic. They elect a dictator, Fabius Maximus, whose strategy is caution, delay, harass, avoid open battle. But Rome is not a patient city. It demands action. And so, in the year 216 before Christ, it sends its largest army yet, 80,000 men, to face Hannibal at a place called Cannae. It is a slaughter. Hannibal encircles the army the first time such a maneuver is recorded in history and annihilates it. Tens of thousands dead. Bodies rot in the heat. Rome is stunned. Allies begin to waver. The Senate prepares for siege. The city is cracked, but not broken, because Hannibal does not march on Rome. Why? Historians still argue. He lacked siege equipment. His men were exhausted. He hoped Rome would negotiate, but Rome does not. Instead, it retreats into endurance. It raises more legions. It tightens control over its allies. It wages a war of attrition, cutting off Carthaginian supply lines in Spain, harassing Hannibal's rear, avoiding major battles. Slowly, painfully, it turns the tide. And in time, a new Roman commander rises. Publius Cornelius Scipio, young, bold, patient. He takes the war to Spain, defeats Hannibal's brother, cuts off Carthaginian reinforcements. Then, in a stunning move, he sails to North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal home. At Zama, in 202 before Christ, the two great commanders face each other, and Hannibal loses. Carthage is broken, forced to pay tribute, forbidden from waging war, left alive but shackled. Rome is now the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. But something else has shifted, almost unnoticed. Victory has made Rome rich, too rich. Grain floods in from Sicily, silver from Spain, slaves by the thousands. The economy shifts. The small farmers, the backbone of the old republic, begin to vanish, replaced by vast estates owned by the elite. The countryside changes, the city swells. A new class of desperate poor gathers in the streets, landless and angry. And at the top, the senatorial class grows colder, more distant. They fear change, they fear the mob, but they fear reform even more. And far to the east, Rome's attention turns to Greece. The Macedonian kings have supported Carthage. Now they must be punished. Rome, ever cautious in words but bold in action, begins to involve itself in Greek affairs. Battles follow. Alliances shift. By the middle of the 2nd century before Christ, Rome has not only crushed Macedon, it has marched into Corinth and burned it. The message is clear. The East is not immune. Greece, the land of Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander, is now a Roman province. But in the Forum, the victory feels hollow, for with every new conquest, something at home grows weaker. The poor are more numerous. The veterans return from war with no land. The Senate resists every attempt at reform, and then two brothers step forward, the Gracchi, Tiberius and Gaius, sons of an aristocratic family. Both try in their own time to bring change. Land reform, grain subsidies, citizenship rights for Italian allies. Both are blocked, both are killed. Tiberius, beaten to death by senators and thrown into the Tiber. Gaius, hunted through the streets, dying by his own hand. Their deaths mark a turning point. The Republic has now spilled blood over politics, and the pattern is set. Military expansion abroad, Corruption and inequality at home. Violence as an acceptable answer. Rome, it seems, can conquer anything except itself. So then the question becomes, can a republic survive its own victories? The year is 133 before Christ. The Forum still smells of sacrifice. The marble still gleams in the sun. But something has changed in the way people walk past each other. There's more watching, less speaking. Senators look over their shoulders. Plebeians mutter in corners. The body of Tiberius Gracchus has barely cooled, and already the Republic feels less like a place of order and more like a glass statue, upright, gleaming, and dangerously hollow. If you stood quietly in the shadow of the Curia, the Senate House, you might hear the city breathing differently, slower, heavier, as if even the stones knew something was no longer as it had been, because the Gracchi had not just proposed reforms, they had named what everyone knew but dared not speak aloud, that Rome was no longer a city of citizen farmers. It was an empire in all but name, fed by slaves, powered by war, and run by men more interested in tradition than truth. And yet, nothing truly changed, or at least, not for the better. The Senate reasserts itself. The poor grow poorer. The Italian allies who fought and bled beside Rome remain without citizenship. The grain supply becomes a political tool. Bribes and violence settle what votes cannot. In the countryside, veterans are squeezed out. In the city, the urban poor become a permanent class, sustained by cheap food and occasional spectacle. But Rome, even as it weakens inside, continues to grow outward. North, into Gaul and Cisalpine territories. East, across Macedonia and into Asia Minor. West, tightening its grip on Hispania. And with every new war, every new frontier, a simple truth becomes clearer. The men with armies hold the future. Enter Gaius Marius, a man from humble origins, a novus homo, a new man without noble lineage, but with a soldier's backbone and a keen political mind. In the late 2nd century, he rises through the ranks, first through talent, then through victory. When North African rebels defy Rome, Marius crushes them. When the northern tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, threaten Italy, Marius defeats them, after earlier Roman generals had been butchered. But more importantly, Marius does something that no one before him dared. He reforms the army. Traditionally, only land-owning citizens could serve. Marius opens the legions to the poor, to those with no property, no stake in the land, no place in the old republic. In return, these men are promised land after their service. They are not fighting for Rome. They are fighting for Marius. This is a quiet revolution and a dangerous one. Now, soldiers owe loyalty not to the state, but to the general who pays them. The army becomes a political tool. Marius is elected consul not once, but 7 times, breaking tradition, precedent, and every polite fiction of the old republic. But he is not alone. Another figure rises, a man with colder blood and older name, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an aristocrat. Sharp, cruel, calculated, a rival to Marius in every way. When eastern kingdoms begin to stir, especially King Mithridates of Pontus Sulla, is given command to suppress the threat. Marius, jealous, uses his influence to overturn the decision, and Sulla does the unthinkable. He marches his army, Roman troops, on Rome itself. The Republic, once a place of debate and law, becomes a battlefield. Sulla seizes control. Marius flees, then returns during Sulla's absence and slaughters his enemies. Then Sulla returns again, this time with more force, and assumes total control. He names himself Dictator, a legal title, but one not used in over a century. He purges. He posts proscriptions lists of men to be killed, their property confiscated. Thousands die. Enemies, rivals, innocents, all swept away. Sulla eventually resigns, retires, dies in peace, but his legacy remains. Rome has now seen its own armies used against itself not once, but twice. The Republic has survived in name, but not in spirit. And in the silence that follows, new men step forward. One of them is a young man from a patrician family, quietly ambitious, endlessly patient. He observes, learns, adapts. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar. But before Caesar comes power, before power comes politics, and before politics, ambition. In the decades that follow Sulla's death, Rome becomes a contest of wills. Senators maneuver like chess pieces. Tribunes stir the masses. Generals build private followings. The streets are no longer safe. Political debates are held under armed guard. And amid this chaos, three men form a pact, not legal, not public, but effective. Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, Crassus the Rich. Each brings something vital. Caesar brings popular support. Pompey brings military fame. Crassus brings money. Together, they rule from the shadows. It is not called empire, but it smells like one. Caesar is sent to Gaul, a vast region still unconquered. For nearly a decade, he fights there. Battles tribes, crosses rivers, builds bridges, wins victories. He writes about it all carefully, cleverly in reports sent back to Rome. His fame grows. His army becomes loyal. Too loyal. Meanwhile, Crassus dies in the east, his ambition undone by Parthian archers. Pompey turns against Caesar. The alliance fractures. The Senate sides with Pompey. And Caesar, as Sulla once did, marches on Rome. He crosses the Rubicon, a shallow river, with a name now forever tied to irreversible decisions. He does not hesitate. And the Republic ends again, not in ceremony, but in civil war. The night is quiet in Rome. Torchlight flickers on marble columns. Somewhere in the Palatine district, a senator wakes from uneasy sleep, sensing, though he cannot name it, that something has crossed a line. Not a soldier, not a law. Something older, colder, and more permanent. A river has been crossed in the north, the Rubicon, and with it, a republic. It is the year 49 before Christ. Julius Caesar, governor of Gaul, hero of 10 years of conquest, has brought his army across that narrow stream and marched south. He is not allowed to. The law forbids generals from entering Italy with their legions. But Caesar knows, as Sulla once knew, that in Rome, legality follows power. The Senate flees. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, now his rival, retreats with his forces. What follows is not one civil war, but many. You, if you are watching this from the Senate steps or the edge of the Forum, would see Rome turned inside out. Brother fights brother. Provinces choose sides. Sicily, Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor. All become battlefields in a wider contest, not just for control, but for meaning. What is Rome, if not a republic? And if it is no longer that, then what? Pompey escapes to Greece, then to Egypt. Caesar follows, always moving, always just behind. And when Pompey arrives in Alexandria, seeking asylum, the Egyptian court, eager to please, kills him. A head, a ring, a message sent. Caesar weeps when he receives it. Whether from grief or calculation, no one can say. He arrives in Egypt and finds a new storm. A royal family at war with itself. A brother and sister locked in dynastic struggle. Their names are Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Cleopatra, 21 years old, clever, shrewd, multilingual, sees in Caesar not just safety, but opportunity. She is smuggled into his chambers, supposedly wrapped in a rug. Whether or not that detail is true, the result is, she wins his favor, becomes his lover, and later, the mother of his only acknowledged son. Caesar stays in Egypt longer than expected. His critics in Rome mutter, but he returns, as always, victorious. And back in Rome, he consolidates. Dictator, then consul again, then consul for 10 years, then dictator for life. Each title voted on, each power granted by the Senate. But each time, the distance between republic and monarchy shrinks. He passes reforms, resettles veterans, standardizes the calendar, begins public works, drains swamps. In many ways, he governs well, efficiently, clearly, even generously. But to the Senate, none of this matters. It is not what he does. It is what he is becoming, a king in all but name. And Romans, do not forget kings. You can imagine the tension in the Forum eyes glancing upward when Caesar passes, whispers in corners, daggers beneath togas. Some fear what he will become, others fear what will happen if he is removed. But the knife, in the end, wins. On the Ides of March, the 15th day in the year 44 before Christ, Caesar walks into the Senate. He is stabbed, not by enemies, but by allies, by friends. by men who had once served him. He falls beneath the statue of Pompey, the man he defeated. And with him, the illusion of the Republic falls too. The conspirators Brutus, Cassius, and the rest believe they have saved Rome. But they have not accounted for Caesar's legacy, because power does not die with a man. It waits for a new name. That name is Octavian. He is Caesar's great nephew, barely 18, thin, pale, unimposing. But Caesar named him heir, left him wealth, left him his name, and Octavian, though young, understands Rome better than most. He does not demand power. He earns it piece by piece. He allies with Mark Antony Caesar's old general and Marcus Lepidus, another loyalist. Together, they form the second Triumvirate. Together, they purge the Senate of enemies. Brutus and Cassius are hunted down and killed in the east. But the alliance cannot hold. Antony drifts toward Egypt, toward Cleopatra. Together, they rule in luxury, detached from Rome, speaking Greek, issuing coins with their faces side by side. The optics are disastrous. Octavian uses it skillfully, portrays Antony as a traitor, as a man bewitched by an Eastern queen, as a threat to Roman values. The war that follows is not just political, it is cultural. Rome versus Alexandria. Octavian wins. At Actium, in 31 before Christ, his fleet defeats Antony and Cleopatra's. The couple flees. Within a year, both are dead suicides, their bodies bound together by tragedy and politics. And Octavian returns to Rome, alone at the top. But here is where he does something remarkable. He does not name himself king. He names himself Princeps First Citizen. He rules not by decree, but by suggestion. The Senate still meets. Laws are still passed. But nothing happens without his nod. He is given new titles: Imperator, Augustus, Father of the Nation. Each step small, each power legal, each change accepted. And yet, by 27 before Christ, the Republic is gone. Not declared ended, not abolished, simply absorbed, quietly, permanently. This is how empires begin. Not with a crown, but with silence. Not with a declaration, but with exhaustion. Rome, weary of civil war, embraces the peace of Augustus. And that peace will last on paper for 200 years. But before we enter that golden age, you should ask yourself, if an empire begins with one man holding everything, how long before someone tries to take it all for themselves? You are now standing in a world that calls itself Rome, but no longer remembers the sound of its own republic. The Senate still meets, it still debates, but real power rests in one quiet pair of hands. Augustus, or Octavian, if you prefer his former name, rules the known world. He does not shout, he does not boast, he simply endures. And in that endurance lies the genius of empire. We are now in the last years of the 1st century before Christ. Rome stretches from the wind-swept coasts of Britannia to the deserts of Arabia, from the grey mountains of the Rhine to the blue harbours of Alexandria. But it is not conquest that holds this world together. It is routine, tax records, grain shipments, diplomatic marriages, roads, walls, sewage systems, aqueducts that hiss and hum in silence. Under Augustus, Rome becomes not just an empire of arms, but of schedules, and under its weight, history slows. You would see it if you lived then in the stone markers by the roadside, in the Latin spoken in distant valleys, in the identical coins found from Jerusalem to Gaul. The stamp of Rome is uniformity. Yet for all this order, Augustus remains a man in need of heirs. He tries many options: his nephew Marcellus, who dies young, his friend and general Agrippa, who dies too soon, his grandsons Gaius and Lucius, both cut down before their time. In the end, reluctantly, he settles on his stepson, Tiberius. Tiberius is careful, capable, cold. He is no crowd pleaser. But perhaps that is why Augustus chooses him, because a machine like Rome does not need charm, it needs preservation. Augustus dies in the year 14 after Christ. His body is cremated. His soul, the Senate declares, has joined the gods. He ruled for more than 40 years. And his system will last for nearly 5 centuries more in the West. But here begins a question, one that you may already be asking. What happens to a world built for one man, once that man is gone? Tiberius rules for more than 2 decades. He centralizes administration. He grows more suspicious. He retreats to the island of Capri, governing from a distance, sending orders by letter. Rome endures but uneasily. Then comes Caligula, Gaius Caesar, known to history by the nickname he received as a child from soldiers' little boots. He begins with promise, generous games, public gifts, acts of goodwill, then something changes. Some say it is illness, others madness. Either way, his rule turns dark. He declares himself a god. He threatens senators. He builds a bridge across the Bay of Baiae, not for transport, but to defy prophecy. He appoints his horse, Incitatus, as a priest, perhaps as satire, perhaps in seriousness. Fear returns to the capital. In the year 41, after just 4 years in power, Caligula is assassinated by his own guards. The Senate debates restoring the Republic. But the moment is brief. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial bodyguards, find Caligula's uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain in the palace. They proclaim him emperor. It is not democracy that saves the day. It is accident. Claudius surprises many. He is scholarly, lame, considered slow-witted by his family, but he proves an efficient administrator. He expands the empire into Britannia, reforms the treasury, rebuilds the harbour at Ostia. He also marries badly. His wife, Agrippina the Younger, convinces him to adopt her son as heir. His name is Nero, and Nero will become one of history's most notorious rulers. But first, he rules well guided by philosophers, advisors, and early restraint. Then, he tires of them. One by one, his tutors disappear. His rivals die. His mother, too, eventually falls out of favour and is killed. The empire remains intact. The provinces are quiet, but Rome itself becomes a stage. Nero sings, acts, races, chariots. The city becomes his theatre, its people his audience, and occasionally his victims. In the year 64, a fire tears through Rome. For 6 days and 7 nights, the city burns. Rumours swirl that Nero watched from a tower, playing the lyre. Modern historians doubt this, but he does seize the opportunity, rebuilds the city to his design, constructs a massive palace, the Domus Aurea, with a colossal statue of himself at its centre. To shift blame, he targets a small religious sect, the Christians. They are crucified, burned, thrown to animals. It is not the last time they will suffer under Rome. In 68, rebellion brews in the provinces. Generals rise. The treasury empties. Nero, abandoned by his guard, flees the city and takes his own life. His last words, if they are to be believed, are, "What an artist dies in me." With his death, the empire enters chaos. 4 emperors in 1 year: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian, each backed by different legions, each ruling briefly, bloodily. It is Vespasian, a general from Judea, who survives. He begins the Flavian dynasty, begins building the Colosseum, reasserts control. But this year, the year 69, is a warning. The empire, though vast, is fragile. The legions, though loyal, are not to Rome but to the man who pays them. Still, Rome pushes forward. Vespasian is followed by his son Titus, who finishes the Colosseum. His brief rule is marked by tragedy, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79, burying Pompey and Herculaneum under ash. Then comes Domitian, another Flavian. Paranoid, authoritarian, but effective. He is assassinated in 96. Once again, the Senate breathes. And from this point, Rome enters a stretch historians later call the Age of the 5 Good Emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius. They rule not by birthright, but by selection adopted by their predecessors, for their wisdom, not their blood. Trajan expands Rome to its greatest extent from the Atlantic to the Tigris. Hadrian consolidates, builds walls, pulls back. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, fights wars on the Danube and writes thoughts in Greek about duty, suffering, and resilience. But Marcus makes one fatal mistake. He names his son Commodus as heir, and with that, the fragile balance shatters once more, because Rome may build aqueducts, raise armies, and lay roads across mountains, but it cannot, it seems, resist the pull of dynasty. And so we end this part of the story with a question. Can a system designed for merit survive in a world that rewards blood? You are standing at the edge now. The marble steps are worn smooth. The Senate still murmurs. The statues still gleam. But beneath the surface, cracks widen. This is still called Rome. The provinces still send tribute. Grain still arrives from Egypt. But the soul of the empire has shifted not with thunder, but with a shrug. Commodus rules, the son of Marcus Aurelius, the first biological son to inherit in over a century, and with him comes a return to something older, something messier. He begins his reign seated beside his father, on campaign in the cold forests near the Danube. He ends it alone, strangled in his bath, after declaring himself the reincarnation of Hercules and renaming Rome after himself. He doesn't just rule, he performs, fights in the Colosseum, wears lion skins, charges fees to watch him pretend at godhood, but it's not the eccentricity that undoes him. It's his neglect, his paranoia, his greed. The Senate grows tired, the palace conspires. In the year 192, Commodus dies. Not with a battle, not in some far-off frontier, but quietly, at home, like rot taking root in the beams of a familiar house. With him dies the illusion of order. Now Rome descends into one of its more frightening habits, a civil war. You may have heard of the Year of the Five Emperors, but it is less a timeline and more a reminder. The title of emperor is not earned by birth or election anymore. It is bought, seized, or inherited by whoever can hold it long enough to be saluted by the legions. Pertinax comes first, a respected old man. He tries to restore order. He lasts 87 days. Then Didius Julianus, a senator, literally buys the throne from the Praetorian Guard. They auction it off. He wins. Rome is for sale now. And the provinces notice. 3 generals rise. Septimius Severus, Clodius Albinus, Pescennius Niger. Of them, Severus wins, marches on Rome, has Julianus executed, dissolves the corrupt Praetorian Guard, fills it with his own men. Severus rules with force and clarity. He doubles soldiers' pay, rewards the army, ignores the Senate. You must get along with each other, he advises his sons on his deathbed. Enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. It is a telling remark. The empire is no longer a republic. It is no longer even pretending. It is a military autocracy, veiled in marble and tradition. Severus dies in Britannia, still campaigning. His sons Caracalla and Geta return to Rome. But within a year, Caracalla has Geta killed in their mother's arms. Blood spatters the walls. Thousands of Geta's supporters are purged. Even his image is chiseled from stone. Caracalla rules alone. He is remembered for many things: brutality, vanity, but also vision. In the year 212, he grants Roman citizenship to every free man in the empire. Some say it was to increase tax revenue. Others say it was a philosophical gesture to dissolve the difference between conqueror and conquered. Either way, it marks a turning point. Now a farmer in Gaul, a merchant in Syria, and a fisherman in Egypt all call themselves Roman. But beneath this unity lies stress. The army is expensive. The frontiers are restless. The currency is debased. Inflation bites. After Caracalla is assassinated by his own guards, Rome spirals into a new phase. The crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors will rule. Most will die violently. Some will reign only for weeks. Goths invade from the north. Persians press from the east. Plague returns. The economy collapses. The provinces begin to fracture. In Gaul, a breakaway empire forms. In the east, another. For a moment, Rome is split in 3. And yet, it does not fall, because amid the chaos, scattered through the fog, are a few stubborn names: Aurelian, Diocletian, Gallienus, men with iron discipline and a sense of timing. Aurelian reconquers the breakaway empires, builds a massive wall around Rome itself. His motto becomes Restituta, Orbis Restorer of the world. But it is Diocletian who remakes the world entirely. When he comes to power in 284, the empire is a mess. Armies rebel, inflation spirals, bureaucracy is bloated and corrupt. Diocletian does not shrink from this. He divides the empire into two halves, east and west. He names a co-emperor, then appoints two junior emperors beneath them. A system of 4 rulers, the tetrarchy. On paper, it is genius. Each ruler governs a quarter. Each region is closer to its threats. Succession is organized. The army is strengthened. Taxation is reformed. Coinage is stabilized. But paper is not people, and when Diocletian retires, the only Roman emperor ever to do so voluntarily, the system he built unravels. Ambition does not retire. Within a few years, civil war returns. And yet, even here, in the chaos of the 4th century, you would still recognize Rome. Its roads, its laws, its grain shipments, its stubborn heartbeat. And you would see something else too. Something new. Crosses. Because during these years, an obscure and persecuted sect is growing. Christians. They are still hunted at times. Sometimes tolerated. Sometimes blamed for drought, plague, or fire. But they endure. Meet in secret. Bury their dead with care. Preach a kingdom not of this world. And in the next part of this story, they will become not just tolerated, but central. Because Rome, it seems, cannot remain what it was. The world is changing. The legions still march. The aqueducts still flow. But beneath the marble, the future is pressing in. So let us pause here and ask, can an empire survive not just invasions and assassinations, but the slow erosion of belief in its own foundations? You are in a field now. A wide, dusty plain under an open sky. Around you stand thousands of men, soldiers, senators, slaves, waiting. They murmur. The wind shifts. At the far edge, a tall figure in a crimson cloak raises his hand. The sun hits his armor just as he steps forward onto a wooden platform. Silence falls. This is not a battlefield. It is a declaration. The man is Constantine. And today, at this moment, the Roman world begins to turn, not with a shout, not with an army's charge, but with a symbol painted on a banner. The Chi Rho. 2 Greek letters, interlocked, the symbol of a strange Eastern god, whispered among the poor, etched onto tombs, carried in secret by Roman wives, merchants, slaves. Constantine will now carry it into war. But let us go back a little. The year is 312. Rome is still divided. The tetrarchy, that grand, careful balance of 4 rulers, has collapsed. What remains is ambition. Civil war. The same tune Rome has sung for over a century. Constantine is one of several claimants. His rival is Maxentius, a strong man who controls Rome itself. Their confrontation comes at the Milvian Bridge, just outside the city. Constantine, by his own account, sees a vision the night before, a cross of light in the sky. Words, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. He orders the symbol placed on his soldiers' shields. The next day, Maxentius is defeated, drowns in the Tiber, crushed beneath the weight of his own failing cavalry. Constantine enters Rome, not just as a victor, but as a chosen one. He becomes emperor of the West, and soon after more political maneuvering, military pressure, and subtle betrayal, the entire empire is his. And now he must rule, rebuild, reform. But Constantine is not like those before him. He is a bridge between worlds. He legalizes Christianity, not just tolerance but protection. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313, ends centuries of persecution. Churches are built, bishops appointed. Christians once jailed and beaten now walk the halls of power. But he does not outlaw the old gods. He does not ban Jupiter or Mars or the sacrifices. Not yet. He is careful. You can see it in his coins. One side bears the Chi Rho, the other, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Because Constantine does not rule just for faith. He rules for stability. The empire is still fragile. The frontiers still under pressure. The cities still crowded and uneasy. So he does something no emperor has done before he builds a new capital, far from Rome. In the east, on the site of an old Greek town called Byzantium, he names it Nova Roma New Rome, but everyone calls it Constantinople. And there, on the edge of the Bosporus, he builds an imperial city unlike anything before it. Temples, palaces, forums, churches, walls wide enough for chariots. It is a city designed not to reflect the past but to point toward the future. The old Rome, with its senate squabbling, its pagan rites, its crumbling aristocracy, is now just one part of the empire. The East is rising. Constantine dies in 337, baptized on his deathbed, called the 13th Apostle by some, and with him dies a certain ambiguity, because the emperors who follow him are not cautious, they are Christian. Some still flirt with the old gods. Others, like Theodosius, go further. He bans pagan rituals, shuts down temples, outlaws sacrifices, ends the Olympic Games. In public life, Christianity is no longer one path among many. It is the path, but within that path, a storm brews. Doctrine, heresy, power. What is Christ? Human, divine, both? Councils are called, bishops debate. In 325, the Council of Nicaea attempts to settle things. The Nicene Creed is born, a statement of belief meant to unify, but unity proves difficult. Donatists refuse to accept bishops who collaborated during past persecutions. Arians teach that Christ is subordinate to God the Father. Eastern Christians begin to differ from Western ones in rituals, language, philosophy, and amid all this, ordinary people still try to survive. Farmers in Gaul adjust to new taxes. Merchants in Egypt worry about grain quotas. Soldiers in Thrace drill beside the border. The empire still works, still functions, but the shape of it has changed. No longer simply a state, now also a church. Power is no longer just about land or gold, but about truth, about souls, about authority over what lies beyond death. And this shift brings both cohesion and violence. Churches are burned, bishops exiled, pagan philosophers silenced. And yet, despite it all, despite the complexity and contradiction, the Roman world continues, for now, because as the 4th century ends, another storm gathers. Beyond the Rhine, beyond the Danube, in forests and steppe and shadow, the Goths are on the move, not as raiders, but as families, tribes, nations, fleeing something even more terrifying, pressing from the east, the Huns. And in 476, Rome will fall in the west. But that is still a generation away. For now, you live in a world where emperors debate scripture, where temples are shuttered and churches echo with Latin chants, where a city named for Constantine gleams beneath eastern sun, and the Bishop of Rome grows in moral authority. So ask yourself this: if an empire can change its gods, its capital, its soul, and still claim to be Rome, then what is Rome really? You stand at a crossroads of history. The Roman Empire, once a city-state ruled by a senate of patricians, now stretches across continents. Its heart no longer beats solely in Rome, but in a new city that glimmers on the edge of Europe and Asia, Constantinople. This city, founded by Emperor Constantine, is not just a new capital but a symbol of transformation. The old world is fading, and a new world is rising, shaped by faith, power, and survival. Constantine's reign marks one of the most profound shifts in the empire's long story. Before him, Christianity was a secret whispered in catacombs, a faith persecuted by emperors who saw it as a threat to their authority and traditions. After him, it becomes the religion of the empire itself, intertwined with governance, law, and identity. Yet this transition is far from smooth or simple. Imagine the streets of Constantinople in the early 4th century. Marble columns rise from the ground, mosaics gleam with gold and glass, and the newly built Hagia Sophia begins to take shape, a temple of worship and imperial power fused into one. Traders from far-off lands bring silks, spices, and ideas, while philosophers and bishops debate the nature of God beneath the dome. The empire is vast, from the chilly forests of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Egypt. But it is also fragile. Its borders are restless. Germanic tribes, once mere shadows beyond the Rhine, have become forces to reckon with. The Goths, Vandals, and others press inward, fleeing from even more terrifying enemies, the Huns, fierce horsemen from the east whose name alone inspires dread. Amid this turbulence, Christianity grows not just in numbers but in influence. Constantine's Edict of Milan, issued in the year 313, grants tolerance to Christians. No longer hidden, no longer hunted. They build churches, take roles in government, and shape culture. The old Roman gods, once worshipped in grand temples and public festivals, slowly fade into memory. The sacrifices at the Capitol cease. The Vestal virgins lose their sacred flame. Yet the empire does not simply replace one faith with another overnight. Pagan temples still stand. Pagan philosophers still write. Rome itself clings to its past. For a time, emperors and citizens alike walk a delicate line, honoring old gods while embracing the new. But change is relentless. Under Theodosius the Great, who ruled at the end of the 4th century, pagan worship is banned outright. The Olympic Games, a tradition stretching back centuries, are halted. Temples are closed, statues torn down, sacrifices forbidden by law. The Christian Church becomes the official religion of the empire. This fusion of church and state reshapes everything. Governors enforce religious orthodoxy. Bishops gain political power. Theology becomes a matter of law. And yet, disagreements persist. The early church is not unified. It wrestles with questions fundamental to its faith. What is the nature of Christ? Is he fully divine? Fully human? Both? Councils of bishops meet across the empire in Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon. These gatherings issue creeds and doctrines meant to settle disputes but often spark new ones. Heresies arise and are condemned. Followers of different beliefs face exile, sometimes violence. In cities and villages, these debates are not abstract. They shape daily life. They determine who can enter the church, who can marry, who can hold office. They influence festivals, sermons, even education. While Rome adjusts to its Christian identity, its enemies at the borders do not wait. The Huns, led by the terrifying Attila, sweep westward in the 5th century. Their raids devastate Gaul and Italy. Tribes once fragmented unite in the face of this threat. The Goths cross the Danube, seeking refuge but often clashing with Roman forces. Cities are besieged, farms are burned. The empire's military strains to respond. Rome's traditional legions, once the backbone of its power, are no longer what they were. Recruitment changes. Mercenaries and foederati barbarian allies settled on Roman landfill ranks. Loyalties blur. The lines between Roman and barbarian become less distinct. Meanwhile, the Western Empire faces political turmoil. Emperors come and go with alarming speed. Rome itself, once the unchallenged capital, becomes vulnerable. In 476, the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustus, is deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. It is a symbolic moment, a quiet end to a centuries-old era. But the story does not end there. The Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, endures. It becomes what we now call the Byzantine Empire, a continuation of Roman law, culture, and administration, but shaped by Greek language and Christian faith. Its emperors rule with divine authority, balancing tradition with innovation. Over the centuries, Byzantium withstands waves of invaders, religious schisms, and internal strife. Its scholars preserve ancient texts. Its artists create mosaics and icons. Its courts enact legal codes that influence Europe for centuries. Back in Rome, the legacy of empire lives on in architecture, language, and law. The Roman Catholic Church rises as a spiritual and political force, shaping medieval Europe. Roads and aqueducts built by Roman engineers serve cities for generations. And so, as you consider the vast sweep of Roman history from its earliest days, as a small city on the Tiber, to the fall of its western half and the survival of its eastern continuation, you see a story not just of conquest and power, but of adaptation and survival. The empire changed its gods, its capitals, its rulers. It endured plague and war, division and reform. It was Rome not because of walls or legions alone, but because of its capacity to reinvent itself, to absorb the new while carrying the old. And perhaps, in that lies its true legacy. As you reflect on this, consider, if empire is more than land, more than law, more than power, what is it made of? What is the invisible thread that holds together a civilization over centuries? Is it loyalty, fear, faith, or something else, a shared story, a memory, a dream of unity? History gives us no simple answers, but it does invite us to listen, to watch, to wonder, and to ask what comes next. You find yourself walking along a narrow, winding street in Constantinople, the great eastern capital of the Roman world. Around you, merchants shout their wares, priests in richly embroidered robes move with purpose, and guards in shining armor patrol the city walls. The air is thick with the scent of incense, spices, and the salty breeze of the Bosporus Strait. This is the heart of a civilization that is both ancient and new Roman in legacy, but increasingly Byzantine in character. The 5th century has passed. The western half of the Roman Empire is no more, fallen to waves of Germanic tribes and internal collapse. But here, in the east, life goes on fiercely guarded, carefully cultivated. Constantinople is more than a city. It is a fortress, a beacon, and the seat of a world empire that will endure for 1,000 years. You might wonder how it survived when Rome itself crumbled. The answer is complex, rooted in geography, politics, and culture. First, the city's location is strategic. Built on a peninsula between Europe and Asia, surrounded by water on 3 sides, Constantinople commands the vital trade routes linking east and west. Its massive walls, first built by Constantine and later expanded by Emperor Theodosius II, make it almost impregnable. In the siege warfare of the time, few armies could breach these defenses. Second, the Eastern Empire's economy is resilient. Its markets overflow with goods from India, Arabia, and Africa. Silk flows in from China, grain arrives from Egypt and North Africa. Taxes collected here support armies, administrators, and a lavish court culture that sustains the illusion of eternal power. Third, the government adapts. The emperor is not just a ruler but a divine figurehead, blending Roman law with Christian theology. The civil service is staffed by educated bureaucrats who speak Greek rather than Latin. The legal system evolves, codifying centuries of Roman law into new collections like the Codex Justinianus. But survival does not mean peace. Constantinople faces constant threats. The Persian Empire to the east remains a formidable rival. Their armies clash repeatedly over the fertile lands of Mesopotamia and Armenia. The empire also faces pressures from the Slavs, Avars, and later the Bulgars to the north. Inside the city, religion shapes politics and daily life. The Christian church grows in influence, and theological debates continue. Heresies arise and are suppressed. Bishops wield power rivaling that of generals. The line between state and church blurs. Emperor Justinian, who rules in the 6th century, epitomizes this blend of power and faith. He dreams not only of defending the empire, but of restoring it to its former glory. His armies reconquer parts of Italy, North Africa, and Spain. His legal reforms preserve Roman law for generations. His architects build the magnificent Hagia Sophia, a cathedral that dwarfs anything in the West. Yet Justinian's reign is also marked by tragedy. The plague of Justinian sweeps through the empire, killing millions. Wars strain the treasury, revolts erupt in the streets. The emperor's vision of a renewed Roman Empire faces limits imposed by reality. As you walk the streets, you hear whispers of tension. The empire's old enemies adapt. New faiths and peoples press closer. The Arab conquests of the 7th century take Syria, Egypt, and parts of North Africa. Constantinople survives only through skillful diplomacy, strong walls, and a new weapon, Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary used in naval battles. Despite these challenges, the empire endures. For centuries more, it will be the last bastion of Roman identity, its language, laws, and Christian faith, a living heritage amid a changing world. But even as Constantinople shines, the West remains broken. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Rome struggle to create their own order. The legacy of Rome is fragmented, scattered among the Franks, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and others. And over time, the church in Rome, now known as the Roman Catholic Church, rises in prominence. The Pope claims spiritual authority, acting as a custodian of Roman tradition and law, even as the political power of the city fades. This sets the stage for a new kind of empire, not one built on legions and roads, but on faith and doctrine. As you consider this vast tapestry, you realize that the Roman Empire is no longer a single entity, but a legacy, a complex inheritance, shaping medieval Europe and beyond. So here is the question for you. How does an empire live on when it no longer rules the world? when its walls crumble but its ideas do not? What parts of Rome survived, and what parts were lost to history? The story of Rome does not end with the fall of an emperor or a city. It continues in the laws we use, the languages we speak, and the faiths we follow. You stand once more at the crossroads of time. The sun glints off the great walls of Constantinople, where the Roman world has found refuge and reinvention. Though the western half of the empire has crumbled under the weight of invasions and internal decay, the east remains a beacon of continuity amid change. This place is both familiar and foreign Roman in heritage, Byzantine in culture, Christian in faith. The centuries following the fall of Rome in the west are a story of transformation, survival, and adaptation. The empire is no longer the vast territorial behemoth of old, stretching unchecked across continents. Instead, it is a complex, smaller, yet intensely resilient state that we call the Byzantine Empire. But to those who lived through these years, it was still simply Romania, the land of the Romans. Imagine the bustling streets of Constantinople in the 7th century. Merchants haggle over spices and silks. Sailors unload ships from faraway ports, and priests in ornate vestments lead processions beneath gilded domes. The Hagia Sophia, completed under Emperor Justinian, towers overhead its massive dome, symbolizing not only architectural genius but the fusion of imperial and religious authority. The legacy of Rome is everywhere in the laws that govern the city. The Latin-influenced language still used in formal contexts, the complex bureaucracy that administers provinces, and the relentless defense of borders. But the empire's world has shifted dramatically. The Mediterranean is no longer the peaceful Roman lake it once was. Instead, it is a contested arena with new players and new threats. Just a few decades after Justinian's ambitious reign, the empire faces its most profound challenge: the rise of Islam. Beginning in the early 7th century, Arab armies sweep out of the Arabian Peninsula with astonishing speed and zeal. They conquer Syria, Palestine, Egypt, once vital parts of the Roman world, cutting off Constantinople from key grain supplies and reducing its influence. The loss of these territories is not just political or military, it is deeply cultural and economic. The Mediterranean, once dominated by Rome, becomes divided. The Byzantine Empire retreats behind its formidable walls and focuses on defense and internal consolidation. Yet the empire does not simply shrink and fade. Instead, it reinvents itself. The Greek language replaces Latin as the official language of administration, reflecting the empire's Eastern orientation. Art and theology flourish, characterized by intricate mosaics, iconography, and theological writings that define Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Emperor Heraclius, ruling in the early 7th century, is a pivotal figure in this transformation. He reorganizes the empire's military and administrative structures, introducing the theme system, a regional division combining military and civil authority to respond more flexibly to external threats. Under his leadership, the empire repels Persian invasions and fights back against the initial Arab conquests. Heraclius also solidifies Christianity's role in state affairs, positioning the emperor as God's representative on earth. This intertwining of church and state becomes a hallmark of Byzantine rule and profoundly shapes the empire's culture and politics. But the challenges remain relentless. The Arab sieges of Constantinople in 672 and again in 715 test the empire's defences. Both fail, thanks in part to the secret weapon known as Greek fire, a flammable liquid projected onto enemy ships, causing devastating fires that cannot be easily extinguished. This innovation, lost to history today, gives Byzantium a crucial advantage in naval warfare. Despite these military successes, the empire is forever changed. Its borders contract. Its economy becomes more regional, its diplomacy more complex, balancing between threats and alliances with Slavs, Bulgars, Avars, and others pressing from the north and west. Within the city, daily life is a mixture of tradition and change. The great hippodrome remains a center of entertainment and political expression. Chariot races stir passions, and can even spark riots. The Blues and the Greens, two powerful racing factions, wield influence far beyond the track, often clashing in violent confrontations that the emperor must manage carefully. Religion permeates all aspects of life. The veneration of icons, sacred images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints becomes a central issue. While many faithful find deep spiritual meaning in icons, others, including some emperors, condemn their use as idolatry. This dispute leads to the iconoclasm controversies of the 8th and 9th centuries periods, marked by political and religious upheaval, persecution, and debate. But the empire endures, guided by a belief in its divine mission and its claim as the rightful heir of Rome. By the 9th and 10th centuries, the Byzantine Empire reaches a new peak of power and cultural achievement. Emperors like Basil I and Constantine VII strengthen the military, reform the bureaucracy, and sponsor the arts and scholarship. Constantinople becomes a center of learning, preserving ancient Greek and Roman texts, while producing new works in history, theology, and law. Trade flourishes. The empire is a vital link between East and West, its merchants dealing in spices, silk, precious metals, and luxury goods. Byzantine silk, prized throughout Europe and the Islamic world, is a symbol of imperial sophistication. The empire also wields considerable religious influence. It spreads Orthodox Christianity to the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, most notably through the missions of saints Cyril and Methodius, who create the Cyrillic alphabet, a lasting cultural legacy. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmer. The empire's wealth and power attract envy and hostility. The powerful Italian city-states, particularly Venice, begin to grow in strength and influence. Their merchants dominate Mediterranean trade routes and exert political pressure on Byzantium. Political intrigue and succession crises are constant. Emperors rise and fall through assassination, revolt, and court conspiracy. The empire's borders remain contested, with frequent conflicts against Bulgars, Normans, Arabs, and later Seljuk Turks. And still, the empire's core identity remains intact. Roman law, Christian faith, and imperial tradition continue to define Byzantine culture and governance. In the West, meanwhile, the story of Rome takes a different path. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced the Western Roman Empire struggle to build lasting states. The Franks emerge as a powerful force, especially under Charlemagne, who is crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 800, a revival of imperial title that links to the Roman legacy, but is also distinct. The Roman Catholic Church grows in political power and cultural influence, shaping medieval Europe and preserving elements of Roman law, language, and governance. The legacy of Rome lives on in law codes, architecture, literature, and the Christian faith. As you reflect on this long and winding story, one spanning centuries and continents, you see that the Roman Empire was never a fixed entity. It was a living, breathing organism, changing shape and character with each generation. Its fall in the West did not mean the end of Roman identity or influence. Its survival in the East gave birth to a new civilization that preserved and transformed its heritage. Its ideas and institutions seeded future empires, kingdoms, and cultures. And in this perhaps lies the true lesson. An empire is not only walls or armies or laws. It is memory. It is adaptation. It is the stories people tell themselves about who they are and what they belong to. So as you stand in the shadow of ancient walls, ask yourself, what does it mean to be Roman? Is it blood, territory, culture, faith, or is it something more elusive, a thread woven through history that ties past to present, empire to idea, man to memory? The Roman Empire's story is not just a tale of conquest and decline. It is a story of survival, transformation, and the endless human endeavor to build something lasting amid change. And with that thought, we close this chapter, leaving you to ponder, when history's dust settles, what remains? You find yourself in the dim light of a scholar's study in 9th century Constantinople. Scrolls and codices litter the wooden desk. Flickering candles cast dancing shadows on walls lined with shelves, holding ancient manuscripts, texts preserved from a world long past. This is the realm of knowledge, where the Roman legacy is carefully guarded and reimagined. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's mantle, has become a beacon of learning and culture in a fractured world. Its scholars copy and translate the works of Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero, preserving them from oblivion. Libraries flourish, and education is a vital part of imperial life. The study of law, theology, medicine, and philosophy thrives under imperial patronage. Just as Rome once codified its laws, so too does Byzantium under Emperor Justinian the Great. His corpus juris civilis, the body of civil law, remains one of the most significant legal legacies of the empire. It organizes centuries of Roman law into a coherent system and will influence European legal thought for centuries to come. This legal framework supports an empire that is constantly adapting. Byzantium's administrative structure blends Roman bureaucracy with Greek culture and Christian theology. It is a complex machine, efficient yet vulnerable to the intrigues of court politics. As you walk through Constantinople's bustling streets, you witness a city that is a crossroads of trade, culture, and power. Merchants bring goods from across Asia and Europe. The imperial court dazzles with ceremony and ritual. The Hagia Sophia stands as a testament to the fusion of spiritual and political power, its vast dome symbolizing the heavens. But this vibrant culture exists alongside ongoing conflict. The empire's borders are under constant pressure from external forces. Bulgars in the Balkans, Arabs in the east, and later the Seljuk Turks. Each wave of attack tests the empire's resilience. The famous Battle of Manzikert in the 11th century marks a turning point. The Byzantine army suffers a devastating defeat against the Seljuk Turks. This loss opens the gates of Anatolia, the empire's heartland, to new invaders and begins a slow decline in Byzantine territorial control. Meanwhile, internal strife grows. Factionalism at court, religious disputes, and economic difficulties erode the empire's strength. The once invincible walls of Constantinople hold, but the empire's ability to project power diminishes. During this period, Western Europe begins to assert its influence. The First Crusade, launched in the late 11th century, is ostensibly to aid Byzantium against Muslim forces. Yet it also introduces complex dynamics between Byzantium and the Latin West. Dynamics marked by mistrust, rivalry, and cultural misunderstanding. Despite these challenges, Byzantine culture and religion remain a source of identity and continuity. Orthodox Christianity deeply shapes art, music, law, and daily life. The emperor is seen as God's representative on earth, responsible for both spiritual and secular order. The empire becomes a mosaic of peoples and traditions. Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Syrians, and others woven together by imperial institutions and shared faith. As you reflect on this centuries-long story, you realize the Byzantine Empire was more than a political entity. It was a civilization, a guardian of Roman heritage in a changing world, but even civilizations face their limits. The Fourth Crusade, launched in the early 13th century, brings catastrophe. Instead of marching to the Holy Land, crusaders divert to Constantinople, sack the city in a brutal conquest, and establish a Latin empire. For decades, the city falls under foreign control, its treasures looted, its institutions disrupted. Though Byzantines eventually recapture Constantinople, the damage is profound. The empire never fully recovers. Over the next 2 centuries, it becomes a shadow of its former self, shrinking under the pressure of Ottoman Turks. The final chapter comes in 1453, when the Ottomans, led by Sultan Mehmed II, breach Constantinople's walls. The city falls after a 53-day siege, ending the Roman Empire's 1,000-year legacy. Yet even in defeat, the story does not end. The fall of Constantinople sends waves through Europe, prompting the Renaissance as scholars flee west with ancient texts. The legacy of Rome, law, culture, faith, passes into new hands and shapes the modern world. So, as you stand here at the close of this vast saga, you might ask, how does an empire that lasts over a millennium leave a mark so deep that even its end sparks new beginnings? What does it mean for a civilization to live on, not just in buildings or armies, but in ideas, art, and memory? The Roman Empire was never just an empire. It was a story of human resilience, adaptation, and the endless quest for meaning in a world always in flux. And that story continues in the ashes, in the echoes, in the history we share. You stand now on the bustling streets of medieval Europe, centuries after the fall of Rome's last emperor in the West and the final surrender of Constantinople. The world has changed, yet the shadow of Rome stretches long and deep. The ruins of its cities, the traditions of its law, the language of its scholars, and the faith of its millions continue to shape civilizations far beyond the empire's borders. In this age, Europe is no longer a unified empire, but a mosaic of kingdoms and principalities. The feudal system defines society. Lords grant land to vassals, Peasants toil the fields, and knights swear loyalty in exchange for protection. Yet beneath this patchwork, the Roman legacy is alive. Look closely at the cathedrals rising across the continent. Their pointed arches and flying buttresses may differ from Roman arches and domes, but their very purpose to connect earth and heaven, to display the glory of God, echoes the imperial ambition to unite faith and power. The Church, centered in Rome, becomes the spiritual heir to the empire. The Pope claims authority not just over Christians but over kings and emperors, invoking a legacy that ties back to St. Peter and the early Christian Church in Rome, the Holy Roman Empire. Founded in the year 800 and created when Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope, claims to restore the Western Roman tradition, though it never controls Rome itself in any meaningful way. Roman law, codified and preserved by Byzantium, and later rediscovered in the West, forms the basis for European legal systems. Universities arise, teaching Roman rhetoric, philosophy, and jurisprudence. Latin remains the language of scholarship and the Church, a thread connecting medieval Europe to its Roman past. But what did this legacy mean to ordinary people? For peasants living in villages scattered across dense forests and rolling hills, Roman law might have seemed distant, but the roads built by Roman engineers still shaped trade routes and communication. The very landscape was molded by centuries of Roman planning. Cities like Paris, London, and Milan grew on sites once part of the Roman Empire, inheriting its infrastructure and urban traditions. Marketplaces, town halls, and baths continued the urban spirit Rome fostered, even as medieval life layered new customs on top. As Europe faced its own cycles of war, famine, and plague, the idea of empire endured. Kings and popes sought legitimacy through connection to Rome's authority. Crusades were launched, not just as military campaigns, but as religious pilgrimages, linking Christendom to the holy places once under Roman sway. And in the East, the Byzantine Empire continued for centuries, a reminder that the Roman story was not a closed book but a living chronicle. Beyond Europe, Rome's influence spread through language and law. Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, evolved from Latin, the language of the Romans. Their rhythms and structures carry echoes of ancient speech, linking people across time and geography. The Roman road network inspired later infrastructure projects. Roman military strategy informed medieval warfare. Roman architectural styles influenced Renaissance builders, who looked back to classical forms with admiration and renewed inspiration. Yet, the story is not only about power and culture, it is about human resilience, the ordinary lives woven into the fabric of empire. Farmers who tilled the soil along the Tiber or the Rhine, artisans who crafted pottery and tools, soldiers guarding distant frontiers, priests ministering to small villages, all contributed to the empire's life and legacy. Even as political empires rose and fell, these human stories endured, forming the hidden backbone of history. So, as you stand amid the ruins of Roman forums, or walk the streets of medieval towns built upon Roman foundations, consider this. What does it mean for a civilization to live on? Is it in its laws, its language, its faith? Or is it in the everyday lives of those who carry its memory forward? The Roman Empire's story is not just a tale of emperors and battles. It is a story of people, adaptation, survival, and the slow unfolding of history. And that story continues not only in dusty books or ancient ruins, but in the world we live in today. What parts of Rome do you see in your life? How do we carry history forward? With that question, we pause again. You stand now in a bustling city square in the 19th century. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over cobblestone streets. Citizens in top hats and flowing dresses gather to hear speeches about progress, liberty, and nationhood. The air hums with change, industrial, political, and social. Yet beneath this modern clamour, the shadow of Rome still lingers. The 19th century is an era of revolutions, political upheavals that reshape Europe and beyond. Monarchies fall, republics rise, and new ideas of citizenship and democracy spread. The ideals of the Roman Republic, justice, civic virtue, the rule of law, are revived and debated. Rome's ancient example becomes a powerful symbol for those seeking to build modern nations. Across the continent, countries look to Rome for inspiration in architecture, governance, and identity. The neoclassical style dominates public buildings, columns, pediments, and domes. Reminiscent of the Roman Forum, rise in capitals from Paris to Washington, D.C. These structures proclaim not just grandeur but the endurance of republican ideals. In Italy itself, the 19th century is marked by the Risorgimento, the movement for unification. For centuries, the Italian peninsula had been divided among kingdoms, duchies, and foreign powers. Nationalists and patriots sought to unite Italy into a single nation, drawing on the memory of Rome as a source of pride and unity. In 1870, Rome is finally captured and made the capital of the new Kingdom of Italy. The ancient city, long a symbol of empire and faith, now becomes a symbol of modern nationhood. The Italian government embarks on a mission to restore and preserve its Roman heritage while integrating the city into a new political reality. Meanwhile, the Roman Catholic Church faces its own transformations. The loss of the Papal States and the rise of Italian nationalism challenge the Pope's temporal authority. The First Vatican Council in 1869-70 defines the doctrine of papal infallibility, emphasizing spiritual authority amid political change. Across the Atlantic, the young United States embraces Roman symbols and ideals. The Capitol building in Washington, D.C., with its grand dome and pillars, echoes Roman architecture. Founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison admired Roman republicanism, incorporating its principles into the Constitution. The 19th century also sees the rise of archaeology and history as sciences. Excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum reveal remarkably preserved Roman cities, providing unprecedented insight into daily life, architecture, and culture. Scholars translate ancient texts and study inscriptions, enriching understanding of Roman law, politics, and society. Yet, despite these advances, the 19th century is also a time of imperial ambition and conflict. European powers carve empires across Africa and Asia, often justifying their rule through a belief in civilization and order ideas sometimes traced back to Roman notions of empire and governance. As you wander through these changes, you see how Rome's legacy is complex, both inspiring freedom and justifying domination. At the same time, the century witnesses social upheavals. The Industrial Revolution brings new technologies, but also stark inequalities. Workers organize, demanding rights and better conditions. The ancient Roman idea of civic duty is challenged and redefined in the modern world. The question emerges: what does citizenship mean in an age of industrial capitalism and modern nation-states? How do the lessons of Rome apply to societies grappling with rapid change and new challenges? As the century closes, new forces arise: science, nationalism, democracy, and revolution, all shaped in some way by Rome's enduring influence. You realize that history is never simply past. It lives in the streets, laws, buildings, and ideas of each generation. And as you stand in the shadow of a Roman column or beneath a neoclassical dome, you are reminded Rome's story is not just about emperors or battles. It is about human aspiration, our attempts to build order from chaos, to create meaning from memory. And with that thought, we prepare to enter the 20th century, a world transformed by war, technology, and ideology, yet still haunted and inspired by Rome's ancient legacy. You stand now in the modern world, a place shaped in countless ways by the empire that began over 2,000 years ago. Skyscrapers tower where Roman forums once bustled. Highways trace paths once laid by Roman engineers. The law courts where justice is debated draw from principles first codified in the Corpus Juris Civilis, and millions still speak languages born from Latin, the tongue of Rome. The 20th century, more than any before, reveals the complex and enduring legacy of the Roman Empire. It is an age of extraordinary change, industrialization, global conflict, technological revolution, and yet Rome's shadows remain. Consider the rise and fall of ideologies that echo Roman themes. Fascism, emerging in early 20th century Italy, explicitly drew on Roman symbols, rhetoric, and imperial imagery to legitimize its power. Leaders donned togas and styled themselves as modern Caesars. The Roman Empire was invoked as a golden age of unity and strength, though this dark chapter ended in devastation and moral reckoning. Democracy, too, traces roots to Rome's republic. The modern idea of citizenship, civic responsibility, and governance by law finds its earliest expressions in Roman institutions. Yet these ideals have been challenged, expanded, and transformed through centuries of struggle. World wars in the 20th century reshaped borders and societies, echoing the rise and fall of empires past. The ruins of Rome remind us that no power lasts forever, that civilizations must adapt or perish. Yet Rome's influence is not only in grand narratives of power and war. It is present in everyday life, our calendars, legal systems, languages, architecture, and even the notion of public service. The European Union, an ambitious project to unify nations through law and cooperation, reflects, in some ways, the ancient dream of a peaceful, integrated continent once ruled by Rome. It faces challenges political, economic, and cultural that echo the struggles of Roman emperors and senators wrestling with diversity and unity. At the same time, archaeology and scholarship continue to illuminate Rome's vast, intricate world. Excavations reveal not just emperors and generals, but ordinary citizens, their homes, food, festivals, hopes, and fears. We understand more about the vast network of roads that connected the empire, allowing ideas, goods, and people to travel. We study Roman aqueducts and baths, marveling at the engineering that brought water to cities and towns. We uncover graffiti etched by ancient hands, small human marks that bridge millennia. Rome's story is thus one of continuity and change, greatness and fragility, innovation and tradition. As you reflect on the entire sweep of the Roman Empire, from its founding as a small city on the Tiber to the vast multi-ethnic empires of Rome and Byzantium, through medieval echoes, Renaissance rediscoveries, and modern legacies, you see a history deeply human. It is a history of survival against odds, of adaptation amid crisis, of the complex interplay between power and culture. So now, you might ask, what does the legacy of Rome mean for us today? How do we carry forward its lessons about governance, justice, faith, and resilience? In a world facing new challenges, climate change, political division, technological upheaval, can the echoes of Rome help us understand the nature of empire, civilization, and human endurance? Perhaps most importantly, what parts of history do we choose to remember, and which do we allow to fade into ashes? The Roman Empire, after all, was not just a distant past. It is a mirror reflecting our own struggles and aspirations. And as you close this story, you realize that history is not fixed. It is alive, breathing through the stories we tell, the ideas we inherit, and the futures we imagine. Thank you for traveling through time with us here on History in Ashes. If you found this journey meaningful, please take a moment to share where you watched from in the comments below. We'd love to hear what time it is, where you are, and any thoughts this story sparked for you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to History in Ashes, because history, like Rome, isn't built in a day, but it lasts when we remember it together. What part of the Roman story resonates most with you? What would you like to explore next? We'll be here, ready to uncover the past, one story at a time.